This renewed my consternation, and I did not know what to think of these white people, though I very much feared they would kill and eat me. There was on board the ship a young lad who had never been at sea before, about 4 or 5 years older than myself. His name was Richard Baker. He was a native of America, had received an excellent education, and was of a most amiable temper. Soon after I went on board, he showed me a great deal of partiality and attention, and in return I grew extremely fond of him. We at length became inseparable, and for the space of 2 years he was of very great use to me, and was my constant companion and instructor. Although this dear youth had many slaves of his own, yet he and I have gone through many sufferings together on shipboard, and we have many nights lain in each other's bosoms when we were in great distress. Thus such a friendship was cemented between us as we cherished till his death, which to my very great sorrow happened in the year 1759, when he was up the archipelago, and on board His Majesty's ship the Preston, an event which I have never ceased to regret, as I lost at once a kind interpreter, an agreeable companion, and a faithful friend, who, at the age of 15, discovered a mind superior to prejudice, and who was not ashamed to notice, to associate with, and to be the friend and instructor of one who was ignorant, a stranger, of a different complexion, and a slave. From Chapter 4. It was now between 2 and 3 years since I first came to England, a great part of which I had spent at sea, so that I became inured to that service, and began to consider myself as happily situated, for my master treated me always extremely well, and my attachment and gratitude to him were very great. From the various scenes I had beheld on shipboard, I soon grew a stranger to terror of every kind, and was, in that respect at least, almost an Englishman. I have often reflected with surprise that I never felt half the alarm at any of the numerous dangers I have been in, that I was filled with at the first sight of the Europeans, and of every act of theirs, even the most trifling, when I first came among them, and for some time afterwards. That fear, however, which was the effect of my ignorance, wore always as I began to know them. I could now speak English tolerably well, and I perfectly understood everything that was said. I not only felt myself quite easy with these new countrymen, but relished their society and manners. I no longer looked upon them as spirits, but as men superior to us, and therefore I had a stronger desire to resemble them, to imbibe their spirit, and imitate their manners. I therefore embraced every occasion of improvement, and every new thing that I observed I treasured up in my memory. I had long wished to be able to read and write, and for this purpose I took every opportunity to gain instruction, but had made as yet very little progress. However, when I went to London with my master, I had soon an opportunity of improving myself, which I gladly embraced. Shortly after my arrival, he sent me to wait upon the Miss Gorings, who had treated me with much kindness when I was there before, and then sent me to school. While I was attending these ladies, their servants told me I could not go to heaven unless I was baptized. This made me very uneasy, for I had now some faint idea of a future state. Accordingly, I communicated my anxiety to the eldest Miss Goring, with whom I was become a favorite, and pressed her to have me baptized, when to my great joy she told me I should. She had formerly asked my master to let me be baptized, but he had refused. However, she now insisted on it, and he, being under some obligation to her brother, complied with her request. So I was baptized in St. Margaret's Church, Westminster, in February 1759, by my present name. The clergyman at the same time gave me a book called A Guide to the Indians, written by the Bishop of Sodor and Man. On this occasion, Miss Goring did me the honor to stand as godmother and afterwards gave me a treat. I used to attend these ladies about the town, in which service I was extremely happy, as I had thus many opportunities of seeing London, which I desired of all things. I was sometimes, however, with my master at his rendezvous house, which was at the foot of Westminster Bridge. Here I used to enjoy myself in playing about the bridge stairs and often in a waterman's wherries with other boys. On one of these occasions there was another boy with me in a wherry, and we went out into the current of the river. While we were there, 2 more stout boys came to us in another wherry, and abusing us for taking the boat, desired me to get into the other wherry boat. Accordingly, I went to get out of the wherry I was in, but just as I had got one of my feet into the other boat, the boys shoved it off, so that I fell into the Thames, and not being able to swim, I should unavoidably have been drowned, but for the assistance of some watermen who providentially came to my relief. Glenarmer being again got ready for sea, my master, with his gang, was ordered on board, and to my no small grief I was obliged to leave my schoolmaster, whom I liked very much, and always attended while I stayed in London, to repair on board with my master. Nor did I leave my kind patronesses, the Miss Gorings, without uneasiness and regret. They often used to teach me to read, and took great pains to instruct me in the principles of religion and the knowledge of God. I therefore parted from those amiable ladies with reluctance, after receiving from them many friendly cautions how to conduct myself and some valuable presents. When I came to Spithead, I found we were destined for the Mediterranean, with a large fleet, which was now ready to put to sea. We only waited for the arrival of the Admiral, who soon came on board, and about the beginning of the spring of 1759, having weighed anchor and got under way, sailed for the Mediterranean, and in 11 days from the Land's End we got to Gibraltar. While we were here, I used to be often on shore and got various fruits in great plenty and very cheap. I have frequently told several people in my excursions on shore the story of my being kidnapped with my sister, and of our being separated, as I have related before, and I had as often expressed my anxiety for her fate, and my sorrow at having never met her again. One day, when I was on shore, and mentioning these circumstances to some persons, one of them told me he knew where my sister was, and if I would accompany him, he would bring me to her. Improbable as this story was, I believed it immediately, and agreed to go with him, while my heart leaped for joy, and, indeed, he conducted me to a black young woman, who was so like my sister that at first sight I really thought it was her, but I was quickly undeceived, and on talking to her, I found her to be of another nation. While we lay here, the Preston came in from the Levant. As soon as she arrived, my master told me I should now see my old companion Dick, who was gone in her when she sailed for Turkey. I was much rejoiced at this news, and expected every minute to embrace him. And when the captain came on board of our ship, which he did immediately after, I ran to inquire after my friend, but with inexpressible sorrow I learned from the boat's crew that the dear youth was dead, and that they had brought his chest and all his other things to my master. These he afterwards gave to me, and I regarded them as a memorial of my friend, whom I loved and grieved for as a brother. After our ship was fitted out again for service, in September she went to Guernsey, where I was very glad to see my old hostess, who was now a widow, and my former little charming companion, her daughter. I spent some time here very happily with them till October, when we had orders to repair to Portsmouth. We parted from each other with a great deal of affection, and I promised to return soon and see them again, not knowing what all-powerful fate had determined for me. Our ship having arrived at Portsmouth, we went into the harbor and remained there till the latter end of November, when we heard great talk about a peace, and to our very great joy, in the beginning of December we had orders to go up to London with our ship, to be paid off. We received this news with loud huzzas and every other demonstration of gladness, and nothing but mirth was to be seen throughout every part of the ship. I, too, was not without my share of the general joy on this occasion. I thought now of nothing but being freed and working for myself, and thereby getting money to enable me to get a good education. For I always had a great desire to be able at least to read and write, and while I was on shipboard, I had endeavored to improve myself in both. While I was in the Etna, particularly the captain's clerk told me to write, and gave me a smattering of arithmetic, as far as the rule of 3. There was also one Daniel Queen, about 40 years of age, a man very well educated, who messed with me on board this ship, and he likewise dressed and attended the captain. Fortunately, this man soon became very much attached to me, and took very great pains to instruct me in many things. He taught me to shave and dress hair a little, and also to read in the Bible, explaining many passages to me which I did not comprehend. I was wonderfully surprised to see the laws and rules of my own country written almost exactly here, a circumstance which I believe tended to impress our manners and customs more deeply on my memory. I used to tell him of this resemblance, and many a time we have sat up the whole night together at this employment. In short, he was like a father to me, and some even used to call me after his name. They also styled me the Black Christian. Indeed, I almost loved him with the affection of a son. Many things I have denied myself that he might have done, and when I used to play at marbles or any other game, and won a few halfpence or got any little money, which I sometimes did, for shaving anyone, I used to buy him a little sugar or tobacco, as far as my stock of money would go. He used to say that he and I never should part, and that when our ship was paid off, as I was as free as himself or any other man on board, he would instruct me in his business, by which I might gain a good livelihood. This gave me new life and spirits, and my heart burned within me, while I thought the time long till I obtained my freedom. For though my master had not promised it to me, yet besides the assurances I had received that he had no right to detain me, he always treated me with the greatest kindness, and reposed in me an unbounded confidence. He even paid attention to my morals and would never suffer me to deceive him or tell lies, of which he used to tell me the consequences, and that if I did so, God would not love me. So that from all this tenderness, I had never once supposed, in all my dreams of freedom, that he would think of detaining me any longer than I wished. In pursuance of our orders, we sailed from Portsmouth for the Thames, and arrived at Deptford the 10th of December, where we cast anchor just as it was high water. The ship was up about half an hour when my master ordered the barge to be manned, and all in an instant, without having before given me the least reason to suspect anything of the matter, he forced me into the barge, saying I was going to leave him, but he would take care I should not. I was so struck with the unexpectedness of this proceeding that for some time I did not make a reply, only I made an offer to go for my books and chest of clothes. But he swore I should not move out of his sight, and if I did, he would cut my throat. At the same time, taking his hanger, I began, however, to collect myself, and plucking up courage, I told him I was free, and he could not by law serve me so. But this only enraged him the more, and he continued to swear, and said he would soon let me know whether he would or not, and at that instant sprung himself into the barge from the ship, to the astonishment and sorrow of all on board. The tide, rather unluckily for me, had just turned downward, so that we quickly fell down the river along with it, till we came among some outward bound West Indiamen, for he was resolved to put me on board the first vessel he could get to receive me. The boat's crew, who pulled against their will, became quite faint, different times, and would have gone ashore, but he would not let them. Some of them strove then to cheer me, and told me he could not sell me, and that they would stand by me, which revived me a little, and I still entertained hopes. For as they pulled along, he asked some vessels to receive me, but they would not. But just as we had got a little below Gravesend, we came alongside of a ship which was going away the next tide for the West Indies. Her name was the Charming Sally. Captain James Doran and my master went on board, and agreed with him for me, and in a little time I was sent for into the cabin. When I came there, Captain Doran asked me if I knew him. I answered that I did not. Then, said he, "You are now my slave." I told him my master could not sell me to him, nor to any one else. "Why?" said he. "Did not your master buy you?" I confessed he did. "But I have served him," said I, "many years, and he has taken all my wages and prize money, for I had only got 1 6 pence during the war. Besides this, I have been baptized, and by the laws of the land, no man has a right to sell me." And I added that I had heard a lawyer and others at different times tell my master so. They both then said that those people who told me so were not my friends, but I replied, it was very extraordinary that other people did not know the law as well as they. Upon this, Captain Doran said I talked too much English, and if I did not behave myself well and be quiet, he had a method on board to make me. I was too well convinced of his power over me to doubt what he said, and my former sufferings in a slave ship presenting themselves to my mind, the recollection of them made me shudder. However, before I retired, I told them that as I could not get any right among men here, I hoped I should hereafter in heaven. And I immediately left the cabin, filled with resentment and sorrow. The only coat I had with me my master took away with him, and said if your prize money had been £10,000. I had a right to it all, and would have taken it. I had about 9 guineas, which during my long seafaring life I had scraped together from trifling perquisites and little ventures, and I hid it at that instant, lest my master should take that from me likewise, still hoping that by some means or other I should make my escape to the shore. And indeed some of my old shipmates told me not to despair, for they would get me back again, and that, as soon as they could get their pay, they would immediately come to Portsmouth to me, where the ship was going. But, alas, all my hopes were baffled, and the hour of my deliverance was yet far off. My master, having soon concluded his bargain with the captain, came out of the cabin, and he and his people got into the boat and put off. I followed them with aching eyes as long as I could, and when they were out of sight, I threw myself on the deck, with a heart ready to burst with sorrow and anguish. From Chapter 5. About the middle of May, when the ship was got ready to sail for England, I all the time believing that fate's blackest clouds were gathering over my head, and expecting their bursting would mix me with the dead, Captain Doran sent for me ashore one morning, and I was told by the messenger that my fate was then determined. With trembling steps and fluttering heart, I came to the captain and found with him one Mr. Robert King, a Quaker, and the first merchant in the place. The captain then told me my former master had sent me there to be sold, but that he had desired him to get me the best master he could, as he told him I was a very deserving boy, which Captain Doran said he found to be true, and if he were to stay in the West Indies, he would be glad to keep me himself. But he could not venture to take me to London, for he was very sure that when I came there I would leave him. I at that instant burst out a-crying, and begged much of him to take me to England with him, but all to no purpose. He told me he had got me the very best master in the whole island, with whom I should be as happy as if I were in England, and for that reason he chose to let him have me, though he could sell me to his own brother-in-law for a great deal more money than what he got from this gentleman. Mr. King, my new master, then made a reply, and said the reason he had bought me was on account of my good character, and as he had not the least doubt of my good behavior, I should be very well off with him. He also told me he did not live in the West Indies, but at Philadelphia, where he was going soon, and as I understood something of the rules of arithmetic, when we got there he would put me to school and fit me for a clerk. This conversation relieved my mind a little, and I left those gentlemen considerably more at ease in myself than when I came to them, and I was very thankful to Captain Doran and even to my old master for the character they had given me, a character which I afterwards found of infinite service to me. I went on board again and took leave of all my shipmates, and the next day the ship sailed. When she weighed anchor, I went to the waterside and looked at her with a very wishful and aching heart, and followed her with my eyes until she was totally out of sight. I was so bowed down with grief that I could not hold up my head for many months, and if my new master had not been kind to me, I believe I should have died under it at last. And indeed, I soon found that he fully deserved the good character which Captain Doran gave me of him, for he possessed a most amiable disposition and temper, and was very charitable and humane. If any of his slaves behaved amiss, he did not beat or use them ill, but parted with them. This made them afraid of disobliging him, and as he treated his slaves better than any other man on the island, so he was better and more faithfully served by them in return. By this kind treatment I did at last endeavor to compose myself, and with fortitude, though moneyless, determined to face whatever fate had decreed for me. Mr. King soon asked me what I could do, and at the same time said he did not mean to treat me as a common slave. I told him I knew something of seamanship, and could shave and dress hair pretty well, and I could refine wines, which I had learned on shipboard, where I had often done it, and that I could write and understood arithmetic tolerably well. As far as the rule of 3, he then asked me if I knew anything of gauging, and on my answering that I did not, he said one of his clerks should teach me to gauge. Mr. King dealt in all manner of merchandise, and kept from 1 to 6 clerks. He loaded many vessels in a year, particularly to Philadelphia, where he was born, and was connected with a great mercantile house in that city. He had, besides, many vessels and druggers of different sizes, which used to go about the island, and others to collect rum, sugar, and other goods. I understood pulling and managing those boats very well, and this hard work, which was the first that he set me to in the sugar seasons, used to be my constant employment. I have rowed the boats and slaved at the oars from 1 hour to 16 in the 24, during which I had 15 pence sterling per day to live on, though sometimes only 10 pence. However, this was considerably more than was allowed to other slaves that used to work often with me, and belonged to other gentlemen on the island. Those poor souls had never more than 9 pence per day, and seldom more than 6 pence from their masters or owners, though they earned them 3 or 4 pisterings. For it is a common practice in the West Indies for men to purchase slaves, though they have not plantations themselves, in order to let them out to planters and merchants at so much a piece by the day, and they give what allowance they choose out of this product of their daily work to their slaves. For subsistence, this allowance is often very scanty. My master often gave the owners of the slaves 2.5 of these pieces per day, and found the poor fellows in victuals himself, because he thought their owners did not feed them well enough according to the work they did. Once, for a few days, I was let out to fit a vessel, and I had no victuals allowed me by either party. At last I told my master of this treatment, and he took me away from it. In many of the estates on the different islands where I used to be sent for rum or sugar, they would not deliver it to me or any other Negro. He was therefore obliged to send a white man along with me to those places, and then he used to pay him from 6 to 10 pisterings a day. From being thus employed, being the time I served Mr. King in going about the different estates on the island, I had all the opportunity I could wish for to see the dreadful usage of the poor man, usage that reconciled me to my situation, and made me bless God for the hands into which I had fallen. I had the good fortune to please my master in every department in which he employed me, and there was scarcely any part of his business or household affairs in which I was not occasionally engaged. I often supplied the place of a clerk in receiving and delivering cargoes to the ships, in tending stores, and delivering goods. And besides this, I used to shave and dress my master when convenient, and take care of his horse, and when it was necessary, which was very often, I worked likewise on board of different vessels of his. By these means I became very useful to my master, and saved him, as he used to acknowledge, above £100 a year. Nor did he scruple to say I was of more advantage to him than any of his clerks, though their usual wages in the West Indies are from 60 to £100 current a year. I have sometimes heard it asserted that a Negro cannot earn his master the first cost, but nothing can be further from the truth. I suppose 9/10 of the mechanics throughout the West Indies are Negro slaves, and I well know the coopers among them earn $2 a day, the carpenters the same, and oftentimes more, as also the masons, smiths, and fishermen the same, etc. And I have known many slaves whose masters would not take £1,000 current for them. But surely this assertion refutes itself. For if it be true, why do the planters and merchants pay such a price for slaves? And above all, why do those who make this assertion exclaim the most loudly against the abolition of the slave trade? So much are men blinded, and to such inconsistent arguments are they driven by mistaken interests. I grant, indeed, that slaves are sometimes, by half feeding, half clothing, overworking, and stripes, reduced so low that they are turned out as unfit for service and left to perish in the woods, or expire on a dunghill. My master was several times offered by different gentlemen 100 guineas for me, but he always told them he would not sell me, to my great joy. And I used to double my diligence and care, for fear of getting into the hands of those men who did not allow a valuable slave the common support of life. Many of them even used to find fault with my master for feeding his slaves so well as he did. Although I often went hungry, and as an Englishman might think my fare very indifferent, but he used to tell them he always would do it, because the slaves thereby looked better and did more work. While I was thus employed by my master, I was often a witness to cruelties of every kind, which were exercised on my unhappy fellow slaves. I used frequently to have different cargoes of new Negroes in my care for sale, and it was almost a constant practice with our clerks and other whites to commit violent depredations on the chastity of the female slaves, and these I was, though with reluctance, obliged to submit to at all times, being unable to help them. When we have had some of these slaves on board my master's vessels to carry them to other islands or to America, I have known our mates to commit these acts most shamefully, to the disgrace not of Christians only, but of men. I have even known them to gratify their brutal passion with females not 10 years old, and these abominations some of them practiced to such scandalous excess, that one of our captains discharged the mates and others on that account. And yet in Montserrat I have seen a Negro man staked to the ground and cut most shockingly, and then his ears cut off bit by bit, because he had been connected with a white woman, who was a common prostitute, as if it were no crime in the whites to rob an innocent African girl of her virtue, but most heinous in a black man only to gratify a passion of nature, where the temptation was offered by one of a different color, though the most abandoned woman of her species.